podcast the best? I certainly think so. So for today's episode, do we call it episodes on YouTube? For today's episode, I'm going to be outlining 6 podcasts that I think are awesome, and I think you will too. Hey there guys, what is up? I'm Tony, and this is another edition of Activism on the Fly. This is a place where we learn about becoming better allies, advocates, and activists. Today's episode is going to be a podcast roundup. I'm going to talk to you about the best podcasts that you should be listening to now if you want to learn more about race and anti-racism work, if you want to become a better activist, and if you want to be actively doing your part, doing the work. I've got 6 podcasts for you, all of which I have listened to or am listening to and that I recommend. So I'm going to keep this nice and quick today. Let's just jump right in. Sincerely, Lettie. Lettie is an historian based in North Carolina, and this woman knows a lot. So if you are someone like me who is trying to get yourself more educated about issues related to race, anti-racism, and kind of just start from a place of learning, this is a great resource for you. Being a historian, Lettie looks a lot at things that have happened in the past, how they have an impact on where we're living today, and ties it all together pretty neatly for the viewer. It's not the most entertaining of all of the podcasts, but I think that it's really full of good information. She comes through with the sources. She leaves links in the website edition of the podcast. She talks about James Baldwin. She talks about why Black people cannot be racist and why reverse racism is not a real thing. She talks about things like white privilege, the basics. And I found it to be a great place to learn. So definitely check her out. Sincerely, Lettie. That's not how that works. Now, I know that I've talked about this podcast before, but I think it's really good. And Weeze and Trudy, the hosts, the hostesses with the mostesses, they also give a lot of great information. I feel like because there's 2 of them, they bring a lot of personality to it. There's a lot of banter. There's a lot of laughs. There's a lot of keeping it real and moments where it's like, ooh, I might have done that in the past at some point. They're talking to me. But hey, that's good. That's why we're here, right? To get spoken to. So whole range of different issues. They talk about privilege, but not always just, white privilege in the time of the pandemic. Issues of language, like certain words that maybe we should stop using. Things that we don't normally think of as being offensive. Some things that we think of as being sensitive, but actually aren't. They talk about the difference between allyship and activism, and that was a really good episode that hit home for me because, as you know, in my little spiel, I always say that I'm becoming a better ally, advocate, and activist, and basically through this podcast I learned how allyship is kind of nothing, doing nothing. That's not how that works. 1619. Yeah, I mentioned this one before too, but if you haven't listened to it already, then go and listen to it. Subscribe. It's by the New York Times. They do a really freaking good job with their podcasts. So 1619, it's just a short little 6-episode series that goes into one specific issue in each episode. So one is, the Declaration of Independence, slavery, emancipation, Reconstruction. One episode talks about discrimination in farming and agriculture, which was kind of eye-opening for me because I'm not really in the realm of farming. So never would have even thought to research that or think about it. But super interesting. Went into healthcare in one episode, and that also was very eye-opening. The disparities in healthcare between white communities and communities of color is just mind-blowing, and the fact that you can kind of trace it back in history and find out why. So 1619, seriously, it's a really well done program, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. This might be my favorite out of all of these, that if you're trying to get some historical information, download it. Subscribe, get it. Nice White Parents. Okay, this is another podcast created by Hannah Jaffe Waltz and produced by the New York Times. So again, the quality is right up there. In this podcast, she takes on segregation in schools, specifically in schools in New York City that are not officially segregated, but if you took a look inside any public schools in New York City, you would see a picture of segregation. She wanted to look into why, and she looks through the lens of this one particular public school in New York City. Through the years and through all of the changes that it's undergone, all of the different desegregation efforts and kind of what has impeded that. What Hannah Jaffe-Waltz found was that the impediment to true desegregation in schools is white parents. Find out more through the podcast. I found it really interesting, not so much of education on one specific topic, but like a mini series that you can get into just driving, going for a jog, doing the dishes, whatever. So check that out. Nice white parents. For those of you who love true crime, this next one is for you. White Lies is a podcast by NPR about the murder of Reverend James Reeb, a reverend from Boston who was in Selma, Alabama to march in support of the civil rights movement after Bloody Sunday. James Reeb was killed in Selma that night, and his murder has never been solved. Why? Two journalists from Alabama, growing up with this story of the preacher who died and the mysterious circumstances around it, have decided to take this case on, get to the bottom of it, and dig up the truth. You can follow along with them wherever you get podcasts. Just tune into White Lies, and this will be great for any of you who like that kind of dark, murdery, digging up of the unsolved type of thing. Really good. Okay, and the last podcast I'm going to talk about is another podcast by NPR. This one is called Code Switch. Now, if you don't know what code switching is, then you might be white, because we don't have to do it quite so much. The term code switching originally is used to refer to linguistics. You're using two or more languages switching back and forth. Code switching has come to be now used in terms of not just language itself, but dialect, behaviors, things like that. So, for example, the way you speak to your best friends when you're hanging out is not the same way that you would speak to a potential employer at a job interview, right? So there's a switch that you do there. Now, for people of color living in America, often they find that they have to partake in cultural kind of code switching. Or how they talk at home might be different than how they talk at work. Maybe hitting the dimmer switch on aspects of their own culture and heritage, their ethnic background at some points to kind of blend better and increase their chances of success in America. So Code Switch is really interesting. It's by two journalists of color, and they talk about all kinds of different things related to race. So basically like the trickiest topic to talk about, and they're taking it on in all different ways. One of the episodes that I listened to recently that I thought was really interesting was, is it time to say RIP to POC? Some, specifically Black people in America, are saying like, hey, don't call me a POC, I'm Black, right? Call me what I am. And they took a kind of a deep dive into attitudes about this term, people of color and BIPOC, or Black and Indigenous people of color. Who likes it? Who doesn't? Why? Where did these terms originate? Stuff like that. And Code Switch is not just about, Black Lives Matter or issues relating to Black people in America. It's really about code switching in general, about holding different identities and kind of wading through life, managing that. So they talk about religious minorities, like Muslims in America often have to use code switching, and there's an episode on issues for Korean Americans, one on Arab Muslims, undocumented immigrants and their stories. And this podcast is really great because it kind of takes on a million different little topics that you might not have ever think about. Like a recent episode is about the fashion industry and how a lot more models of color are being shown on the front page of fashion magazines. Is this trend going to last? They take a dive into the fashion industry and issues of race, of inequity, and messy stuff. This podcast has educational value, but it's not like, here is the term white privilege and here is what it means, right? It's more like a think piece every episode. So it's diving into something that maybe you've never thought about before. Like, I don't do a whole lot of thinking about the fashion industry. keep it pretty basic. But that's why it's so awesome, because you are learning about things that you probably haven't thought about before, and especially if you're white, and cisgender, and Christian. So definitely check out Code Switch. Scroll through till you find an episode that sounds like super interesting to you, and give it a whirl. Let me know what you think. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Short and sweet. Just wanted to highlight a couple of the podcasts where I've been getting really good information, where I've been getting inspiration. And there's a little bit of everything in there, right? There's education, there's true crime, there's mini series of interest. So go ahead and check those out. Let me know in the comments what you think after you do. If you have other favorite podcasts that are related to activism, anti-racism work, or race issues in general, any favorite podcasts in that kind of like realm, then please leave those in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to get any new suggestion, because I love listening to podcasts. It's one of my favorite ways to consume information. That's going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. If you want to follow along for more activism related content, or if you want to watch me fumble through my journey to becoming a better ally, advocate, and activist, then please go ahead and click that subscribe button. I would love to have you here on this journey. And with that, I'm out. Thanks for stopping by. Activism on the fly. Bye, guys.